Clarissa. If anybody has any questions or comments for either of them, we have about 10 minutes and then we'll go into a 5-minute break. I do see Mark Oman had a question for Clarissa. Mark, if you want to chime in.
I'll state the question I wrote. So Clarissa, regarding the high frequency variability of both dissolved oxygen and pH as recorded at the pier, does that have a diel component to it? And is that a reflection of the diel vertical migration and daytime surface aggregation of the Lingulodinium?
Most certainly it can be.
Most certainly it can be.
Somebody has to mute themselves. Probably I should not if I'm answering the question.
I think it might be on Mark's end.
Okay, Mark, we might be getting some feedback. Yeah, and I wish I could have spent some more time on the wire walker data. Drew very nicely can walk through with his talk the evidence for the diel migration in those data. It's really strong and profound to see the backscatter pulse as it moves up and down in the water column diurnally. And I have no doubt to think that that's partly what was going on there with those huge fluctuations. And that was those measurements are at a time when the bloom was at those 9 million cells per liter that I described. So certainly.
Okay, so maybe Chris, could you maybe vocalize the conversation you were having with, is it Louis or Louis?
Lou Botsford?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Lou.
Okay, maybe you can just read my questions.
Yeah, sure. So Lou asked, how do the domoic acid closures of Dungeness crab in California relate to the entanglement closure? And my answer is that they're highly related. So
one second, Chris. Clarissa, you're still sharing your screen, just in case you don't want people to see your emails.
So during the 2015-16 HAB event, the Dungeness crab fishery reopened in around, I think it was like April, when the sort of whales were back in town from their annual migration. So the overlap was elevated relative to that time of the year and led to a lot of entanglements. Though I will say that I'm working on a separate project related to the whale entanglement issue, and when I've reconstructed like historical fishing effort using fish ticket data and like compared that with estimates of whale distributions, that period had really high overlap, but not as high as sort of season openers in other years. And I've seen sort of similar patterns with others that have done that sort of reconstruction using AIS pings. So Jamil Samari at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center has done that. So definitely related, but it's also interesting because I think other times have been even more risky. Oh, and then the other question was, what did I mean by opaque communication in California? And it was a little bit provocative, but basically that Oregon and Washington have these really nice websites for mapping out what areas are closed for what due to domoic acid closures. And with California, you have to really dig into the sort of latitude and longitude coordinates of press releases. So it could be particularly challenging for a user.
Yeah, well, hopefully they can fix that.
Yeah.
Or we.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Clarissa,
I can relate Stephanie's question, which was a good one. Did we ask if anyone in the survey had gotten tested for COVID? It would have been phenomenal. I don't even know if it occurred to us. I think at the time we just were under the impression that you had to be at death's door before you could get a test, and so we didn't ask. And the survey is now closed, unfortunately.
And then Clarissa, it looks like there's another question from Albert.
Yeah, Al. Yes, so Drew Lucas is trying to model that surface feedback and look at how much of that temperature response was plankton driven. Not published yet. All of these things, hopefully most of them will go into that special issue. I think some, if they're more high profile or heavy hitting, they could go elsewhere. But
nice. that doesn't get looked at too much. We actually put that feedback into the Bering Sea model, and I know it's gone into a few other plankton models, but usually not.
No,
So,
it's overlooked. Most of the work I know is related to the equatorial Pacific, and so I'm very excited about this prospect.
great.
Okay. Any other questions for Chris or Clarissa? Looks
Noel
like
wants
Noel,
to know
Noel had a,
if it affects
yeah.
your model. Do you see the question, Al, that Noel has for you? He wants to know how big of a difference it makes for the Bering Sea model.
Right, I was just about to type in. It's not huge. I mean, it's not completely trivial, but it's not the biggest term. There are other things that are far more significant.
Interesting. Well, that's still a very, that kind of stuff doesn't get talked about a lot. Actual biological feedbacks back into the physical system. So that's cool to hear that it has any effect there.
Yeah, we added it in. We were having some trouble getting a match between the observed temperatures and the model temperatures, and that addition did seem to help a little bit. But yeah, it's not the most overwhelming thing. Other terms like solar radiation, of course, make a bigger difference.
Cool. Great talks, Clarissa and Chris, by the way.
Thanks, Noel.
Clarissa, I had a question for you. I was fascinated by the poll, the survey that you did with the surfers. I'm really surprised that nobody's ever done a comprehensive study of this. But this is way outside my wheelhouse. But how does it? What is it about the harmful algal bloom, or how does it make people sick? Is it when you swallow the water, or is it aerosolized, or is it just like point of contact sort of thing? How does that work?
So that is a mechanism that is TBD, and I wouldn't say no one's done it. So Florida or places where there's a really well-known aerosolized toxic issue, like with Karenia brevis, it produces something called brevetoxin, which is known to be in the aerosols. It's well identified that is what causes people to have respiratory attacks who are on the beaches. So that's why they close the beaches down in Florida when there's a red tide. But that's their red tide organism. Our red tide organism is a little different. People have not given a lot of credence such that we don't have a lot of data. We don't have surveys like this. Some failed attempts to get money from NIH in the past, I think, but over time, no one has looked at it comprehensively. The fact that we're acetoxins as well as these sulfur compounds in the aerosols is a good lead to starting to answer the question you just asked. But a lot of times it is respiratory, but sometimes it's rashes, sometimes it's contact dermatitis and other things. And Rafe he's probably the only biological oceanographer who has a paper in like emergency medicine or something, but it has to do with a serration bloom, also sometimes referred to as a red tide, up in like more the Monterey Bay area, where a woman did get some kind of like brain infection, some brain eating bacteria or something, but it was associated with this bloom such that you could make the link between the two. Not to terrify everybody, but
yeah. Goodness.
Looks
Okay,
like
we got a few
have
minutes
Uva.
left.